saying the following. The first one is that we have had an incident in Grootvlei Unit 2, a fire incident. I've been in contact with the GM, the executive responsible for generation at Eskom, Mr. Becky Numa, just to get a sense of the extent of the damage. I want to confirm that immediately after this briefing, I'll be going to Grootvlei just to get it firsthand through not just a written explanation, the technical reports, but also just visual observation on the extent and the degree of the damage, so that when I stand before the public, I'm comfortable about the timelines we are giving on returning that unit. But I have been advised that it's not a major or catastrophic failure. The fire was contained and extinguished, and essentially is the pipes that feed in and also return the fuel oil that had been damaged. And the team anticipate that it should not be a long outage. And of course, they are not able to say in absolute terms how long will that take. And I must say that it's taking out about 190 megawatts. So this is one of our older power stations. The units, they are not as big as the ones that you find at the Krill, 600 megawatts or so of the size of the units, and also significantly lower than our recent or newest youngest power station, that will be Medupi and Kusile, which each unit will pack 800 megawatts. But I think the point to be made is 2 points. The first one is that every megawatt counts. So in the context of the crisis that we are confronted with, every megawatt counts. So we are going to do everything possible to ensure that we are able to address that situation. The second one is that the situation of a fire at a power station, albeit not necessarily abnormal in that not necessarily that is expected. I'm just saying that generating units, the kind of mechanics and engineering components as we experience at the power station, you do of course build into that the risk of fire, and that's why you've got emergency services for those who are the firefighters permanently stationed at every station. I think it's just an admission that there is that risk. So there's that an inherent risk of fire. But I'm saying that we should be worried that we have had a fire, I think, also in Medupi that had taken Unit 4, and this should be worrying us that you have such incidents. And it's something that requires urgent attention. It's not something that happens regularly, but it's something that when it happens, it has to worry all of us, and that's why we'll make every possible effort to ensure that we are able to stem that situation. Of course, working with the able engineers at Eskom. And then the second area that I need to give you an update on, the last time when we met, I did indicate that I will be visiting Quebec, and indeed we had the visit to Quebec late last week. I think it was on Thursday, just an extensive presentation on the state of affairs. Remember, we needed to determine a number of things. So the first one is just trying to understand the reasons why is it that we are having an extended outage sleep in relation to Unit 1. Just for the record, we have taken out Unit 1, essentially taken out 920 megawatts out of the grid. And the initial, if you like, timeline that was given was that we should have returned this unit sometime in July. And as I speak to you, I think the outage sleep now is over 71 days. So this is something that should worry us. And I must say that having gone to Quebec and gotten the extensive presentation, I'm not even wiser today about the situation, and that's why I'm elevating this to the board. Of course, there's protocols just for me to communicate with the board in relation to the report that should give us comfort that we have the situation under control. I stand before you to say that from my discussion with the team at Quebec, I'm absolutely not convinced that we are on track to return the unit, even at the time that the Unit 1, at the time that they promised, having accounted for the inherent risk and the delays. And this presents a real danger of the overlap between the delayed return of Unit 1 and also the taking out Unit 2. And if that were to happen, we are going to lose an aggregate 1,840 megawatts, 2 units having gone out at the same time. So it's something that we are trying to avoid. And like I said, I'll come back because there are additional questions that were not responded to when I had met with the team when we were at Quebec. So I'm the none wiser about our ability to return this Unit 1 as promised and or before we are able to take out the Unit 2. So that's the risk that still sits there, and I remain extremely worried about the situation at Quebec. But my responsibility is not to lament the risk, the situation, but to work with the team to ensure that we are able to avert the worst case scenario. And in the instance of Quebec, the worst case scenario is the 2 units being out simultaneously, taking out, like I said, another 920 megawatts in addition to the current 920 megawatts that has been taken out as a result of Unit 1 not being operational. And then the third area of feedback is the work that we are doing on the transmission side. Remember, I kept on making the point that the one area that is receiving simultaneous attention to our efforts on the generation side is the transmission side, so that it's able to enable us to accommodate renewable energy capacity that should come onto the grid. There are major issues with regards to the grid in relation to its configuration to be able to accommodate new generation capacity that is located in the areas where we don't have a grid capacity. So we have established work stream number 10 that is working with us at Newcom, that is just solely focused on the transmission side. And then they have about 5 broad areas of work. So they just recently started their work, and of course we are going to occasion an opportunity for us to just share with you extensively on the work that we are doing. But just to elevate the areas of focus of the transmission work group, the first one is to ensure that we address the issues around the expansion of the grid. And in this relation, we are going to do a number of things. We are tracking about 25 projects in existing substations that will potentially unlock about 13 gigawatts of energy, including the 1 gigawatts self-build IPP projects in the next 5 years. So we're looking to track those projects, like I said, 25 in the existing substations, so that we're able to enable these 13 gigawatts of projects to come on stream in the next 5 years. And then we also are tracking 22 projects that are classified as expedited that will unlock about 24 gigawatts of grid capability by 2023. So in the next 10 years, we think that it's possible for us to be able to have an additional 24 gigawatts that are expedited on the expedited track, so that we are able to make good of our commitment in part to ensure that we decarbonize. And we did identify transmission side to be an area of constraint, if you like. So it's something that requires attention to enable this work to happen. And then we also internally in government are addressing, of course, in the context of the work that Mr. Dix has been doing with the team at Operation Vulindlela address the issues of the need for us to expedite the regulatory approvals, the issues around the EIAs, the water use license, issues around access to servitude or rather land to be able to provide the necessary infrastructure that is going to support the rollout of this transmission capacity. So I'm just saying, in the context of the Workstream 10, that also constitutes an area of focus. But of course, we have been doing exceptional work led by Mr. Rudy Dix on Operation Vulindlela together with the team. And then there will be a focus area on regional interconnectors. So as you know that we want to ensure that we explore and maximize the potential of international connectors and trade, which include identifying the catalytic projects required by the region. So it's important that we also contribute to the self-sufficiency, energy sufficiency of the region. As you know, that South Africa is a major anchor in relation to energy security in this area, and if we have the kind of challenges that we are having, we are also threatening the security, energy security of the neighboring countries. So it's important that when we have this conversation about transmission, it's not necessarily domesticated to South Africa, but we have a much more bigger scope, if you like, a regional perspective of how we want to address the opportunity, the challenges first, and then opportunities going into the future. And then we also are going to be addressing another area of the funding. I did make mention the last time that the expansion and the strengthening of the grid is going to require an inordinate amount of money. And of course, the ESCOM balance sheet is not in a position to finance the kind of expansion that is required, both the scale and the speed at which we need to respond to the need on the transmission side. The ESCOM balance sheet will not necessarily be sufficient to be able to support that. And of course, we need to think creatively around what is it that we'll be doing to address that. So really, those are the areas that are of focus. So what we have been doing, I think, in the past few weeks, the work stream was to, if you like, determine the parameters, essentially what is the objective of the work stream. And those are the 4 key objectives. And then we do accept that there's going to be ad hoc requests and projects that requires the attention on the transmission side. We'll take those on an as and when basis, but the overall, if you like, framework of how we are going to be executing our work as work stream number 10 on transmission, like I said, is expansion of the grid, is the issues of regulatory approvals. The third one is the regional interconnectors, and the fourth one is the financing of the effort that they will be making going forward. And then let me take you through what has been the performance of the grid over the past week. I think this is going to be very helpful just for us to have an appreciation of where we are now as I speak to you. So I'm going to just share with you so that you have a better appreciation of where we are. So the first thing is that you can see that the 5-day average ending I think the 21st of July, the average available capacity has been about 28,643. And of course, when we started the week, there was a significant ramp up. Remember the last time when I stood in front of you, I did indicate that there was an expectation that by the 18th, we're going to receive an additional 5,000 megawatts. And indeed, we're able to return a significant number of those 12 units that were out. We had indicated that we expected to return about 12 units by the 18th of July. And of course, as those units returned, and there's been a number of units that went out. And this points to the fact that I've been raising all along, is that there's a need for us to ensure that we're able to continue to improve, if you like, the reliability of these units. I think it's particularly unhelpful when Eskom has to go out from time to time, the announcement of the intensity of load shedding. I think there was one day where we shifted the intensity of load shedding about 3 times in a space of about 6 hours. And I think that undermines, one, the credibility of our efforts, but two, the ability of industries and households to be able to plan, because they would affect at lower stages of load shedding on account of our statements, the announcement, the alerts that we are releasing. And when people reorganize their lives in that way, then we elevate the intensity of load shedding. It's something that requires attention, and I'll share with you much later what is it that we think will happen as and when the opportunity for us to add additional megawatts on the grid. I think it's going to give us an opportunity to take a number of these units out, ensure that we work on their reliability, so that when we make the promise of stage X, you don't find that much later. We then have to make an amendment to that announcement and say stage X plus Y, and therefore just undermines the credibility of the statements that Eskom is releasing from time to time. And then the additional area of focus still remains the work on the unplanned capability loss factor, the units that keeps on tripping. It's an area that requires our attention. I did make the point that we want to keep it at less than 15,000 megawatts, but we can see as a part of our optimistic scenario when we did the winter outlook, and you can see that we are not keeping to that, and we do admit that it's an area that requires attention, because of course it takes on the available capacity, and therefore the correction that you introduce as a result of the elevated UCLF is the instrument that you use is the intensification of load shedding. So that has got a direct bearing on the intensity of load shedding, and that's why I make the point that is an area that is receiving attention. Of course, I did make the point that when the unit trips, it means that they are out, they are not providing us megawatts, and that's why we need to make these efforts to make sure that we stop the units from tripping, and that's what then imposes on us the need to revise upwards the intensity of load shedding. On the partial load losses, I do make the point that the units are running, but they're not running at the capacity that is closer to what is the design capacity. So we need to make additional interventions to make sure that we are able to lower that. And of course, the PM focus still remains a primary driver, of course, of what is the extent of the delta or the gap between demand and generation. The higher the demand is and generation is not lifting to the levels that we want it to, then it means that the instrument available to the system operator is the intensification of load shedding. Of course, on the outage slips, when we started, I think since we started this, the lowest that we had gotten to was about 1,300 megawatts, and you can see now that we have added an additional 1,000 megawatts on the outage slip. So that performance that we've been seeing essentially has been reversed, and that's why it's important that we were able to address this. The outage slips is something that is within our direct control. We are the ones who make the determination on when we think the unit should come back on stream, having factored into that the issues around the components that are available, the time that it is required for us to return that unit, and having done that computation, then we make a promise that this unit will come back by this period, and then we fail to meet that promise, and it's something that has to do with planning. We'll continue to improve on that, and the totality of this is that of course, the levels of load shedding are not going down to where we want them to be, even with this elevated peak demand. My view, when I was sharing with the team, is that we should not be anyway upwards of stage 3, but it's something that is requiring our collective attention. And I do promise that we are addressing this with the agency that is required. And then this is outside just the the work that we've been doing in the last week, I think it's important that we're able to put it into context so that we get to have a trend analysis. So a trend in this instance is a period over about 4 weeks. That's a trend that we want to use. And then we then stretch it back to May to say where we are, if you had to do an instantaneous analysis, if you like, the current situation compared to where we are in May. Are we seeing any kind of improvement? And of course, what we are seeing is that we are seeing improvement on the generation side. So if you use the baseline of May, we were at about 27,000 megawatts. As I speak to you now, we have added an additional 1,600 megawatts. I'm talking about that average, the baseline of May vis-a-vis the past 5 days. And I think that's an area that is receiving additional attention from my side so that we're able to see what is this trend. Of course, you are going to have peaks and troughs in that period, and then you average it, and then you compare that average with the baseline, and you are able to say with some degree of confidence whether we are making any significant progress, or there's a reversal, or we have plateaued. I think that's what this is attempting to answer. And of course, on the demand side, the expectation has always been that when you enter the latter parts of June and you enter into July, we are going to see the demand that is spiking, and of course that has kept to our own projections. You can see that the demand for July has been greater than any other period during this winter window. So this is not something out of the ordinary. This is not something that is unexpected. If anything, if you see that average demand essentially has been lower than what has been our worst case scenario of about 34,000 megawatts. We only experienced that about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. That's when we had about 33,900 megawatts. But all along, the demand has been on average about 30,000 megawatts. And like I said, this is outside our own projection. And then an area that we are beginning to elevate is there has to be a nuanced approach on our interventions. And I did say in one of the briefings that Gauteng accounts for, as a province, accounts for the highest load. So Gauteng accounts on average about 25% of the load. So the interventions that are made in Gauteng, they do matter. The weather situation in Gauteng does matter. When you are not able to have the benefit of PV when it's cloudy, and then demand is rising, I think it's got a disproportionate impact on our ability to provide the megawatts, because if you do the totality of the megawatts available, we are also drawing from the renewables. I mean, just to give you a taste, I think it's about, was it Tuesday or Wednesday, Thursday or so, when we only drew about 37 megawatts from the renewables. I'm saying, and this is as a result of the overcast weather conditions. So the renewables did not come to the party at the time that we needed it because of the weather situation. And of course, once that weather situation is in Gauteng, you are going to have a disproportionate impact, if you like, on the grid performance, the outlook, and therefore it deteriorates, if you like, the intensity of load shedding. We're going to go to higher stages of load shedding. So what we're trying to illustrate here, if you look at national peak demand, and I'm talking about the peak demand, you will see that Gauteng on average accounts for just shy of 30%. So Gauteng does matter. Of course, it accounts for 1.2% of the total land mass of the country, but we know that it's a significant player both on the economy side and also in relation to the total population. And that's why we're working very closely with the Gauteng provincial government and also the municipalities in Gauteng, so that we're able to coordinate and orchestrate jointly our intervention, so that they get the necessary traction that is desired, and then the returns are greater. If you had to use the Pareto principle, once we intervene in Gauteng, 20% of the effort, you are likely going to receive 80% of the return. So that's how we're looking at it, that there's a need for us to make additional interventions here in Gauteng. I made the point around the outages, the load losses, and the outage slips. And when you pull all of these things together, they talk to the balance of the grid. And then when there's a deterioration in relation to outages, in relation to partial load losses, in relation to outage slips, all that does, it degrades if you like, your generation capacity, and therefore the instrument at the disposal of the system operator is just to intensify the levels of load shedding. And that's why we have to be focused on these three elements to ensure that the generation capacity is able to be improved. Essentially, these three areas, they talk to what we call the energy availability factor. And that's something that is receiving our attention. We are of the opinion that once the 4 units of Kusile comes on stream, of course, there's a unit 5 that is projected to come in October, and then the 3 units, 1, 2, 3, that were affected by the flue gas desulfurization units. The last one comes on stream on the 24th of December. That's going to give us, like, as we project, approximately about 3,000 megawatts of additional generation capacity. And when that comes on stream, and of course, given what we are expecting to be lower demand because we'll be into summer conditions, then we must ramp up, if you like, planned maintenance so that we are able to ensure that we build the necessary resilience to ensure that we don't have these unit failures from time to time. And then ESCOM is then expected to be revising, if you like, their projection with regards to the schedules of load shedding. Like I said, when we revise it too often, it just eats into the credibility of our messaging, and then it undermines the ability of industry and household to respond and adjust to the projected load shedding. And that's why we think that in addition, just to give us additional generation capacity, we are going to use that window to ramp up plant maintenance so that we are able to get the necessary resilience that is required to be able to ensure that when we say load shedding is behind us, it's truly behind us. Even if you were to experience, as expected, units that are failing, that will not trigger the need for us to be able to introduce a stage of load shedding because we have built the necessary buffer. I'll leave it here and then we'll take questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Minister. We will now take questions. We will start with the colleagues in the room and then move to the online questions. I see your hand already. You can come through.
Good morning, Minister Ramokgopa. Minister, you say when the 4 units of Kusile come back, we can use that to run our plant maintenance. But you also said to us we can use that to lower load shedding. So which of the two is the one not excluding the other in the short term? And then I just want to ask, the changes in the grid access rules of ESCOM, or the new interim rules, have not been accepted very well by the private sector. They say it will lead to uncertainty and a lot more investment has to be done before there's certainty that you have grid access. Now there's also a legal challenge to that. Do you expect this whole situation to further delay the introduction of more renewables, or what is your position on it?
Thank you very much, Madam. Any other colleagues in the room? Okay, I think, Vanessa, you can take us through the online ones.
We have 14 questions so far. The first question is from Terence Creamer, Engineering News. Is the Minister concerned that a court case seeking to interdict review and set aside ESCOM's inter-grid allocation rules could delay the launch of the next renewables bid window? Does he plan to intervene in any way? Helmo, Independent Media. Are we receiving any power from Botswana? Is the government asking the BRICS New Development Bank for funding of the transmission expansion? Any news on the timelines for when the transmission division will become a separate company? All those questions are from Helmo. Chris Yelland, EE Business Intelligence. I'm hearing about a possible forensic investigation into financial irregularities, delays, and other matters at Gubek involving Eskom and Framatome people. Can you please confirm and clarify what this is all about? Two more questions from Chris Yelland. Please, can you advise whether the new capacity from rooftop solar PV reported by Eskom and the table provided in their latest system status report includes solar rooftop PV on the Eskom network only, or whether this includes solar PV on both Eskom and municipal network? The other question is also from Chris Yelland. Can you please also advise whether the table provided includes solar PV panels that have been authorized by Eskom or municipalities, or whether it includes both authorized and unauthorized installed solar PV systems? The other questions are from Siphelele Ndludla Business Report. The first question. When the Quebec outage was planned, it was initially estimated to cost around 20 billion, and this was a 2010 estimate, when inflation was very low and the rand was strong. With the outage slip now, 71 days overdue and counting, how much is the Quebec life extension expected to cost the taxpayer in real terms? Or is this part of the information not being shared with the minister? What is it that is really frustrating the minister about what is happening in Quebec, and why is he referring to the problems there to the board of Eskom when the president gave him powers to do everything required to deal with load shedding? Those are all questions from Siphelele Ndludla from Business Report. The next question is from Nick Olsen from News 24. The feed on my side was buffering, so I have a few questions for Minister Ramokgopa that he may have already answered. I just wanted some clarity. My first is around the Groot Flag fire and whether it has been established exactly what caused the fire yet. I know initial reports seem to indicate that an oil spill in the boiler room had ignited, damaging cables. Was there any negligence involved? When will it be back on stream? This is another question from Nick Wilson at News 24. I would like to follow up on an update from Gubek. I know the minister said now he is extremely worried and none the wiser about Unit 1. Whether it will return after his visit to Quebec. What are his next steps with regards to this? The last question from Nick from News 24. I also wanted to ask the minister about the grid rules and what impact this could have. News 24 reported about the matter yesterday, flagging how G7's court intellect could be potentially major blow to the imperative to add more